Hello, welcome all. I guess we'll wait a moment or two for Dr. Glass to get her camera on. We will do what's needed to make that happen.
Can you hear me?
I hear you, yes.
I think you need to give me permissions to start my camera. It says host has stopped video or something.
Okay, yeah, it's a Zoom setting. It's not me. Oh, well, no, we'll do it. It's something on Zoom. We'll get it done. Because she needs permissions in order to turn on her video or something. There we go.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining this conversation.
I'm so glad.
Am I joining yours? Are you joining mine? What are we doing?
I think I'm now the host is what's happening.
Right, that's a Zoom technicality I'm talking in terms of the conversation itself. Okay, so I guess at this point, everyone is here. This as well will be recorded and hopefully published within the next week or so on our channel. And I'm sure anyone who follows either of us on social media or otherwise will see the link to that, provided we don't say anything too crazy that it doesn't make sense to publish afterwards.
Yeah.
All right. You said yesterday one of your goals this evening is to have fun during this conversation. It's a little bit of a heavy conversation, or it could be. So.
Yeah, we don't want to disrespect the topic. It's such an intense topic. But also, you're coming at this in good faith. You want to bring awareness to something. So we don't need to make the whole thing so heavy. Hopefully we can educate people with a smile some of the time.
Right. And educate myself as well. I come to this mostly with curiosity. I stumbled into this conversation. Before we go there, let's start with, let's introduce you. So I'm sitting here with Dr. Sara Glass, Clinical Director of Soul Wellness, New York City, and the Clinical Supervisor at JQY, Jewish Queer Youth. Can you introduce yourself a little more fully to the audience?
Hi, I'm Sara Glass. I'm the founding partner of a little practice in Midtown Manhattan, where we do trauma-focused and queer-affirming work. My expertise is in the treatment of complex trauma, PTSD, and dissociation. I came into this work working mostly with Orthodox Jewish clients, since I'm a Yiddish speaker and I understand and I'm from the community. In the more recent years, I've been working with people also as a subspecialty who are struggling with the intersection between queer identity and Jewish identity. So it brings me right to the topic of this podcast. That's my professional expertise. I also think it's important just to know who you're talking with as a person. So just a little bit about myself as a person. I was raised in a Hasidic household in Brooklyn, New York. And I grew up as a regular Hasidic young girl, had feelings for girls, didn't know how to describe those feelings, and then got married off to a man when I was 19. And then spent the ensuing 13 years quickly having 2 children and figuring out how to navigate the aspects of my identity while keeping my children safe. If you've heard any of my Modern Love podcast or my Times essay, you might be familiar with some of it. There's a book coming out next year, so there'll be plenty of time to talk about me. But that's how I come to this conversation with personal and professional experience.
Awesome. That's perfect. That's the type of experience we want when we're having this conversation. So, by way of background for those who've just come to this conversation, the way it came up for us. So I hosted a conversation several weeks ago. It was a 3-part conversation, 2 of which have been completed so far, called Tackling Taboos. And we spoke about, with Rabbi YY Jacobson and myself, and we spoke about a plethora of subjects. And one of the subjects we spoke about was homosexuality. And during that conversation, I should say that leading up to the conversation, even before we said anything, I got many messages: stay away from this topic, stay away from this topic, stay away from this topic. I'm not uncomfortable talking about uncomfortable topics. I've spoken a lot. I as well grew up in a Hasidic community in Crown Heights. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I started sharing my personal journey of being sexually abused as a child and healing from that. And I spoke publicly about porn addiction. Those are not things that many people are comfortable speaking about. So I am comfortable talking about topics. And still with that, people said, stay away from this conversation of homosexuality. It wasn't only told to me, it was also told to Rabbi YY Jacobson. In all candidness, the only topic we really spoke about before the webinar was, like, do we really want to go here? Does it make sense? And in the first webinar, I said, hey, let's leave this for the second one where we can give a more wholesome discussion. But there were certain statements that were made, either by myself or Rabbi Jacobson, which left some people frustrated. In general, I should say that we both received excellent feedback. A lot of people in the community very much appreciated that we covered the topics, but also this as well. One of those messages that I received, she didn't give me permission to name her, so I won't, but it seems like a wonderful person, reached out to me and said, hey, these are some topics that some could have understood the wrong way. And I think a person worth talking to is Dr. Sara Glass on this subject. So you and I first had a conversation offline and then said, hey, why don't we do a webinar together? And as I learn things, then why not bring it to my audience as well? So one of the things that people said was, hey, if I'm having this conversation with YY Jacobson, like, where is the woman? Where is the person from the LGBT community? Let's have someone there. I said, obviously, that's not possible in every conversation. Right? Let's put that out of the way. I'm not going to not talk just because there's not a woman present or not. We spoke about many subjects and there weren't people present. That being said, it would make sense to have those conversations. So why do you think that aspect is important, and what does it add to it specifically when we have someone, a female, someone from the LGBT community with a personal professional experience? What should we expect tonight?
Well, first of all, thank you. It's one thing to get feedback. It's another thing to take the feedback. And it's a brave endeavor venturing into a conversation like this. So thank you for being open. In terms of why it's important to have that voice, it's humanizing. When you have a conversation about a population of people without them present, it feels like they're very other. And it's easy to reduce that down to even words like homosexuality. It sort of reduces an entire identity down to an act, a sexual act, instead of seeing it as a person, seeing the person behind the words, or letting them define the words that they want to use for themselves. And so I think having the voice of someone who has worked with so many youth and individuals who've had similar experiences of trying to figure out, am I gay? Am I straight? Am I bi? Am I trans? Am I queer? Do I not want a label? That brings the human into this dialogue.
Beautiful. Perfect. It's actually one of the things that got me speaking about porn addiction, is that I saw people talking about it, and from a science perspective and from some from a religious or moral perspective. Let me speak from a personal experience as someone who got sucked into that world and has been working to navigate out of it in a lot of ways. So I understand it, appreciate it, and value it. So thank you. I think it would also be important for us to frame this conversation. The interest, I guess, on our parts is not only the LGBT community, but also the Orthodox community. Yes. Neither of us are rabbis. So we're not coming to this from a halachic perspective. As much as we may touch on some things, we're not speaking, either of us, as a halachic authority. Is there any other ways that, before we go into this, you'd like to frame this conversation for those listening? What are we attempting to do tonight, in your opinion? And what are the bounds maybe that we're staying within, besides for and including halacha?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate enough to work with so many wonderful organizations over the years. I just want to say that I'm not speaking for any organization tonight, just merely talking from my own personal and professional experience. And two, this topic is so big that we're not going to cover it tonight, but I hope to open a dialogue. So Perfect. Just take the pressure off off us, off our listeners. Like, we're just trying to open a respectful dialogue about it.
Right. One of the things I've thought about it is that, if it was figured out, if someone had that magic bullet, that answer, right, specifically around this intersection of LGBT and orthodoxy, then the matter would be put to rest, right? It wouldn't be so difficult to talk about it. We'd have resolved something in some way. So this is tough probably for everyone, and it is still unfigured out, right? There's still a lot of questions around this.
Yeah.
In my previous conversation with Rabbi YY Jacobson, people took issue with a few things. I've already addressed one of them, which was, what right do I have to speak? Right. So firstly, I take issue with limiting anyone from talking about any subject, of course. It doesn't help anyone to do that.
Yeah.
Secondly, who's to say who has experience with an issue or not? Right? How does someone know what my experience? Did I not wrestle with my sexuality in some way? Don't many of us wrestle with our sexuality? Do some experiences not count? So we're all human beings with human experiences, and I think there's a lot of latitude in terms of who gets to speak on something. I think we all do. And I think that conversation will help move these things forward, not the opposite. But that being said, I would like to address some of the other issues with more specificity with you. So one of the terms that was used in that conversation, and obviously we're talking with a rabbi, right? So it was the conversation of homosexuality within the context of Judaism. And the term struggling with homosexuality, I think one time it was said struggling from homosexuality, which I understand why that's, I don't think much needs to be said about that line, struggling from homosexuality. I think we understand why that is not the way to speak about this. But struggling with homosexuality, people seem to take issue with that. Can you explain that? Did I misunderstand it? I'd like to address it. Is there something I need to understand about that?
We already covered that homosexuality is like a terrible way to frame, right? But
right, not that word. It seemed like the struggling with.
Yeah, this time we'll just do the struggling with. And I'm sorry to pick it. Yeah.
Right.
So, I think that when someone comes to a rabbi, sometimes the question is a struggle with an aspect of their sexuality. And that is a word that the rabbi might use in describing the conversation. Someone approached me and they were struggling with their sexuality. The problem becomes that it sort of has, from what I've seen, it's become like a blanket way of describing the whole queer narrative, is in describing someone who might be identifying anywhere along the rainbow spectrum. People of Orthodox or other religious faiths will say they're struggling with homosexuality. What I've seen just from my work with queer youth and people is that sometimes the struggle is actually with their parents, with their brothers and sisters, with their community, not so much with their sexual orientation. Like, for example, just in advance of this webinar, a young individual messaged me and said, I know I'm trans, but my parents are Orthodox. What do I do? Right. So that's an example of a young person whose struggle is not with homosexuality.
Right. There was, I know I'm trans.
Yes.
That was clear to them. Understood.
And I just don't know what to do. Like, where do I put myself in this world? What do I do next? How do I tell? So, it just doesn't, like, I understand there's specific areas where it applies. It's overused. It's generalized.
Okay. And when that happens, why is that so bothersome? Meaning, in the 2.5 hour conversation, there were many, there was a lot of language that someone could have jumped on but didn't. This was something someone did. So why? What is it about that term, beyond the fact that it doesn't apply to everyone? Is there something that's can be hurtful to someone in some specific way? Is there something that's tremendously bothersome to someone?
I think, like, to me, it just makes me feel invisible. And as a queer person in the Jewish community, I've already felt invisible for so much of my life. And so it's like, you're finally we get a rabbi who's brave enough to talk about the whole topic, But then that language makes it feel like I don't even get to be included in the conversation about whether I'm allowed to exist in your community.
Right. It feels to you in some way like there was a determination already made.
Yeah.
That it's not so we spoke about the intersection of, I believe the term used was queer identity and Orthodox identity or orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. And the struggle was not along the lines of the queer identity. The struggle was along the lines of the orthodoxy. And using that language kind of puts an end in mind, almost.
It really does. I think that's a really great way to put it. It puts an end in mind. Like, I want to resolve my struggle and either, leave orthodoxy or try to erase some of the feelings I'm having. That's one part of it. Aside from like erasing a big part of the rainbow spectrum queer population.
Okay, so I think that makes sense. I think that's understood. A second part of it was there was a link made between people who experienced sexual abuse and later in life sexual identity confusion. So while clearly suggesting that this is 100% of situations is preposterous and untrue. But I understood the criticism to be a little bit past that. Meaning, even if we were talking about, it felt this way to me, and maybe I was incorrect. It felt like even if I was describing a specific individual, mm-hmm. and I said this, some may find it offensive.
Yeah.
And am I missing something? Did I misunderstand that link? Because to me, always it's offensive and wrong. Right? It's just not true. And then, but never, is that also, it feels the same way to me, that it's also untrue. So what am I missing, and where did that come from, you think, that criticism?
You're starting me off really easy, I see. Okay. As a sexual abuse therapist, one, let's just say the stats are staggering on sexual assault and sexual abuse. As many as 1 in 3 girls and women will experience some sort of sexual assault by the time they reach the age of 18, 1 in 5 boys. Those are conservative estimates. So, to say that none of those will overlap with people who later identify as queer in some way would be untrue, right? There's got to be some overlap. It makes sense that there will be. And as you said, we haven't had research that indicates that there's a definitive link of any kind at all to the contrary, between sexual assault and queer identity. Why does it hurt so much, I think, is your question. And I think...
No, my question was different. My question was, why did I understand the criticism correctly? That's what it was. Meaning, I understand if someone says, oh, here's a queer person, they must have been sexually abused. That's ridiculous. But when talking about an individual story and saying this person was sexually abused and later in life struggled with sexual identity, and this person made a link between the two, or maybe someone as an observer is making a link between those two situations, that too seemed offensive to people. So A, did I understand correctly that that's offensive to people? And if so, why?
Are you saying the person themselves described that they felt like there was a connection between their own sexual abuse and their identity?
Correct.
Right.
And their
thinking...
identity confusion later on. Yes. That they themselves made that link. And then in reporting of that story, someone else hearing that may find that offensive. Did I misunderstand that? Is that not offensive to say? And then we're all on the same page.
I think we each get to define our own reality. So if someone's been through something and now that they're questioning everything about themselves and they feel that that's linked, they get to say that. They're allowed to do that. I think that in the queer community, we're all a little, I call it we've been sunburned. And so anything that touches close to the area of the burn will hurt. And we've just been probably many of us have been told, if you're identifying this way, maybe there's trauma. And the implication is maybe then we can fix you.
Understood.
And
Okay.
hearing
So
that, it might fit into that hurt template. That said, on the individual level, of course, that person gets to define, right, what happened to them and what that feels like for them.
Right. That being said, I should be clear that within that webinar, it was touched on several times. So I think if someone watched all of them, they'd be okay. But there definitely were snippets where it went a little bit too far on that point. There's no question about it.
Okay.
When we failed.
Snippets are tough, right? That's
100%.
Yeah.
Right. Meaning, I think within the 5 or so hours, we addressed the same point, that it's preposterous to say always. However, there were snippets which definitely, when I listened to it, I thought, hey, why didn't I clarify that then?
Yeah.
One other thing, related to the webinar, and then let's see where this goes. So within a few of the messages that I received seem to, right away jump on this term reparative therapies. Before I go in there, can you explain reparative therapy? I've never experienced it. I know many people who have, and pretty much uniformly, I've only heard negative things, more than negative things, harmful things, and what it sounded to me like outrageous things as part of it. But can we explain it a little bit from a therapeutic standpoint, and then I'll ask my question.
Okay. I have not experienced reparative therapy, thankfully. I have spoken with people who have. I wouldn't call it therapy. From the therapeutic standpoint, I would call that abuse and traumatizing. People who engaged in this sort of traumatic attempt to force individuals into changing their sexual orientation use all sorts of methods that were physically harmful and manipulative and shameful, and caused tremendous PTSD in the people who participated.
Right, I imagine that as part of your trauma work, you've dealt with some of this stuff.
Yes.
Right. I think it's important that we do talk about this because I don't know how common it is or it isn't. I do know of many stories of people who say that as part of their journey from orthodoxy into accepting their gay lifestyle, they themselves went through a period of wanting to change themselves and then engage in whatever they could and say, hey, someone's offering this type of therapy. And whether I've heard it from some individuals, I've read stories online about it, people who went through that process, and pretty much 100% of them all said it was a terrible, harmful, hurtful experience. Right? So I think we can say that, but at the same point in time, although I don't know of anyone who says, hey, this is good today, we'll stand up and say that, there seems to be some people pushing back against it still, like, hey, this is a danger, this is a risk. So I would imagine they're pushing back because there are some people who still believe it. So I think believe it's possible or believe it's workable. So can we talk to a little bit of that? If someone is sitting here listening to the webinar and say they're from parents with a child who's, let's say, accepted their queer identity, they don't struggle there at all, but the parents believe, hey, there's a therapy or reparative therapy that can change them. So what would you say to that? How would you explain to someone, obviously well-intentioned, they want what's best for their child? What would you tell them?
I'm going to do a quick commercial break on gay lifestyle, just commercial break. That it just also is one of those terms that's a little tough for people to hear who are identifying along the queer continuum.
Did I use that term?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I didn't.
I'm sure
I didn't even notice.
Do, right? Like, and that's the thing that this stuff slides into our conversations because we're so used to it. And actually, I think you were trying to be sensitive when you said it.
If anything, yeah.
Yeah. It slipped in. So I have to flag it and we can talk about it more. It just makes it, I don't know, what's the gay lifestyle? Do we all live on a rainbow boat and wave the flag? I'm just a person, right? And I happen to be queer. So it just gives us this weird picture of an agenda. But going back to the parents here, that's the question.
So is that something that would bother you, bother anyone, you think? Or bother, not anyone, but
it makes
a lot of people?
Actually, because I've seen so many TikToks making fun of this word that now I just laugh when I hear it. like, but it's yes, it is.
Right. I think I've used it the other way also.
Yeah.
Right? Like straight lifestyle. Right. What is a straight lifestyle? Right. But it just,
what is the straight lifestyle? Like, is my Starbucks a square Starbucks? Is it straight Starbucks? I don't know. Is this part of my lifestyle? Like, what's in your cup? So it makes it sound like it's something other than what it is.
Okay.
Okay. So going back to the parents, one, I would say, I hear you. I understand. You're hearing this thing about your child that is terrifying. And if you're a parent, I'm a mom. I have 3 children. It's really scary to think that your child will grow up in a world where they won't be accepted. And they won't be able to fit into your shul, your home, like your family environment. You don't know what their future looks like as an Orthodox Jew. So just number one, of course you're looking for a solution, probably because you love your child and not because you're really trying to hurt them. And you deserve support around that. Like, for any parent who's going through this, you deserve support. There are organizations that are so supportive for this. Now, the other thing just to know is that this therapy, which is not therapy, it's abuse, has been banned and it's illegal because it takes a young, innocent child who's already struggling, or even an adult, and puts them through a series of torturous experiences that will harm them for the rest of their lives. Don't do it.
So let me ask this. So what are the available choices to someone who's at this intersection? I sent you an email. I don't know if you had the chance to read. It was a very long question that came in. The others that I got, I figured I can incorporate it into my own, but this one I said, hey, let me forward this over to you. Did you had a chance to read that before?
Yes.
So what are the options available to someone at this intersection of queer identity and Orthodox identity to live a wholesome life? Meaning, is it always in favor of, from a therapeutic standpoint, are you saying that it's always in favor of one versus the other? That it's, you understand what I'm saying? That someone adopting the queer identity and then saying, okay, how does Orthodoxy meet that? Or might someone choose to say, I'm not going to change this, right? So reparative therapy is saying, I'm going to somehow knock this out of this person. However, I mean, it almost sounded comical when I heard of some of these things, besides for the abuse aspect, but comical that someone would think that this might work. Like, where else would we do this? Like, let me do it with pizza or something. It just seems ridiculous to me, but whatever, however it got there. I understand the desire to want to change it, but saying that, okay, this can't be changed, speaking to parents, what are kind of the choices for that child to live a wholesome, free life?
So I think you're asking 2 separate questions. One is, right, like for the individual, how do they survive? How does the individual survive, like holding both identities? And 2 is, what do the parents do? What does the community do? What do the grown-ups do in that situation to help support and affirm and preserve the mental health of that child that's going through it?
I think I'm saying something else. It's that you've spoken to, or say for yourself, your own experience, you're saying, okay, I have my queer identity. I still want a community that I belong to. Schools and shuls, and Judaism is a part of me. Do I have to now find a new religion because of my identity? So you've said, okay, this is my identity, and Orthodoxy, there are certain aspects of the way people are practicing Orthodoxy which you'll want to shift in order for the community in order for that acceptance to take place, right? And I'm sure it's a combination of internal and external work, right? Recognizing that we're not going to get everyone on board and having to find a place of self-acceptance, and at the same point in time, needing a shul to go to, a community to go to, and so on. What is there a path that looks similar to the email you got today? Is there a path that looks the other way, where someone says, okay, I'm not going to change this part of myself. I'm not going to knock it out with reparative therapy or otherwise, but I'm going to adopt an Orthodox lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to say, okay, this part of me maybe is not being acted on sexually in some way or some other thing. Is that still a wholesome way of, in your opinion, of this child living free and true to themselves?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. I think there's so many ways to handle this. I don't think that everyone needs to come out of the closet and live in, or maybe engage in activities related to their internal identity in order to be healthy. Like, there are so many ways to handle this. And there's not one way, there's not one answer. So one thing to be careful of is people who tell you that there's one right path. I think, like, you have to abstain from any kind of relationship, or you must, beat yourself into being the opposite of what you feel like on the inside, or you must come out of the closet in order to be healthy. I think that those are binaries that are just like, none of those are really the right answer for everybody. And everyone gets to sort of just do what feels best for them. The only thing that I worry about within that is people's mental health. And that we know, like, for some people, hiding a part of who they are does result in a mental health crisis or mental health consequences. And so that could be like a guideline for which decision is right for each person. Is like, if I choose this, will I be okay? Will I survive? Will I be mentally healthy?
Right. Would it be more than just surviving? I mean, that's not our basic goal. Yeah. But you're saying that starting from the framework of prioritizing one's mental health, and then saying for that individual person, finding the path that can work for them. But right, what I've found, and I have a close friend who's been wrestling with this for a long time, a really long time. And he just doesn't see how the two are compatible in any way. He cannot accept either. So the way it feels to me from him is that he sees zero way to fit this with that, and he wants both. It's clear to him that he wants both. And one of the things he struggles with is that I think 100% of the people he's gone to for help have immediately offered a solution to him. Like, the way out of this is you're going to be from, and we'll deal with this, and this is the other one. And you'll marry a woman and everything will be fine, and we'll figure out how to do this. Or this is about you coming out of the closet and embracing you. And he doesn't feel, the way I understood from him is that he hasn't felt that he's been able to talk to someone, not as an individual, as a professional, as someone who's actually in a capacity to help him with, his mental health.
Yeah. Who
doesn't have a strong bias in either direction of this resolution.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely something, one of the things you're bringing me to a really good point, which is, what do you look for in a therapist when you're struggling with something related to, like, holding the intersection between these two identities? And what you want in a therapist is someone who can hold both, and who will, like, give you the space to just say, hey, let's explore this. Let's see how you feel. And genuinely has no agenda as to what you get to at the end of that exploration. You need, like, space to understand and figure out what your gut is saying.
That's excellent. And then the priority, kind of the direction in mind, is saying, okay, this individual's mental health, are they okay? And then if within any of these, I mean, people live so many different ways. I mean, it's endless the way one can choose to live in all areas of life. As long as they're doing okay, then we're okay with it. And if not, then we have to keep talking.
Yeah, but mental health is one baseline, right? And like you said, like maybe for some people, happiness, it depends on what that person's priorities are. I know that for me, like with my own life, I was closeted for many years, and part of that decision was with my circumstances. Had I come out of the closet at different points, I would have lost custody of my children. And so that would have been a decision that would have resulted in me having probably the worst mental health. I don't know if I would have gotten through coming out of the closet and losing my children. So the right decision for me was to stay in the closet with my kids and love them and raise them myself. And so I understand more than anyone that it's not always the right thing to do one thing or the other. And then there was a point where that became harmful, and I couldn't do that anymore.
Understood. But that is a blanket rule that someone who's looking for help navigating this intersection is find someone who doesn't have a clear agenda in either direction and is willing to look at your situation individually and help you through that process.
Yeah.
Did you feel, I guess, to ask a personal question and tell me if you or not, did you feel like when you were working through that you were able to find people who were understanding of your decision not to come out of the closet at the time? Was that difficult to find? I know within the Orthodox community, you're going to get the other message. I'm saying, was it hard to find people who would generally tell someone, hey, it's okay to come out of the closet? They couldn't accept that side, but were understanding of yours? Meaning, is my friend's frustration, is that typical? Is that common? Has he just not found the right person?
I was so deep in the back of the closet underneath the shoe rack that I didn't really have conversations with anyone. So he's way ahead of where I was. But I would imagine his experience is very common.
Understood. So part of your message here is to therapists and those assisting in professional capacity, is leave room for that person, especially when navigating something so, it's not Orthodox identity we're navigating. We're navigating our sexual identity and our belonging.
Yeah, and right, and we need to think about, I don't know what's good for each client. For some people, if the cost of coming out of the closet is losing your parents, who knows? I can't tell you whether that will hurt you even more. That's not mine to decide.
What about if the cost is, as this individual described in the email, he seemed to have accepted many aspects of the story from the way he was writing, many aspects of the story, but he said it went up against what he described his individual values. And he made room for others in his statement, choosing, meaning, is there a situation where you can find that it can be healthy for someone not to come out of the closet because it's going up against their individual values as related to Orthodoxy and not external circumstances like losing kids, losing family, or losing anything else that would just be too high a price to pay?
Yeah, it could also be losing an aspect of your relationship with God. That's very painful. Or with your internal value system. Absolutely. It's all valid.
Understood. Yeah, I think that, if we stopped, and I want to put a pin in here, because if we stopped at you yelling at me for using the term struggling with homosexuality, we never would have got to. No, you didn't.
Okay.
You didn't. I'm saying if we stopped at that, if that was where this conversation, not you, but there were some messages that seemed like that was the appropriate direction. Right? Mm-hmm. Which I understand. I understand there's hurt, and the sunburn analogy you gave is perfect. I'm saying if the conversation stopped at that, we would have never got to this point.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I meant. I meant not with you. No, our conversations have been nothing but terrific. I'm saying if the conversation stopped as, I have no right to talk about it because I said A, B, and C, and a term was used, struggling with, if the conversation stopped there, that this point that was just made, which I think is so real to the individual, is find your path that works truest to you with the goal in mind of mental health, and find someone who's not leaning towards any one agenda, but can hear your individual circumstance, whether it's your children or your family situation or any of those things, and not come in with a bias. My friend has reported that within 5 minutes of the conversation, people have already telling him where this has to go. So you understand that this is going to move this direction. How can that? You haven't heard all of my details. You don't know anything. You don't know anything. And I think that's why I wanted to put a pin in that way, is saying this could have never happened if what happens sometimes is just to say, hey, this person said something like gay lifestyle, which I didn't even know was an offensive term, and that, or a term that some may find offensive. Because that I found also, by the way, that if anytime I said something that sounded like I was talking about everyone, like, oh, everyone is offended. No, not everyone. I'm not, right? Someone, right? I quite like what you said. And so there's, anyway, I just wanted to point that out. It's in that nuance. It was about the nuance of that point. It's impossible to get to unless we flesh out a conversation.
Yeah.
And we can't fit that into a bumper sticker.
This is really pivotal. Not that many people are open to just being wrong, right? Holding the pain and the conflict. And this is why these conversations are going to be so important in moving our community forward. People can't begin to wrap their head around something that they don't really have enough information about.
Understood. Yeah, and I think that oftentimes that happens because of the lack of conversation. So hopefully this can be, we open a dialogue, hopefully not only for us two, but for more people, just to start sharing that. And what I've found in so many other subjects is that it's in those individual nitty-gritty stories that we learn so much, right? That, when you get to page 50, page 75 of someone's book, not what you hear in the first. Did I understand correctly? You're coming out with a book on your personal story at some point?
Yes. There's a memoir. It'll be coming out in June 2024. It's with Simon & Schuster. My editor are going back and forth on the title, so I don't have it yet. But if you follow me on social media, you'll be updated as soon as I have it.
Awesome. I look forward to reading it. So one of the most fascinating things I learned from our first conversation was how someone in a gay relationship may
Recording stopped.
If you guys are still on, I don't know what happened to Ellie. I don't know if anyone can still hear me, but I'll just wait for him to pop back in. Just hang in. Sorry about this. You can hear me. Okay, thank you. I'm taking the time to listen to questions, and I'm going to mute myself so I can call Ellie and see what happened to him. Well, thank you so much, guys, for your messages. I feel bad, like, co-opting the Zoom. And I'll see. I don't think Nash was suggesting to anonymous attendee. I don't think he was suggesting that the person should stay Orthodox and be alone forever. I'm sorry if that sounded that way. I would not suggest that. I don't think he would suggest that either. Hang on, I just need to make someone else the host. Give me 1 second.
Okay, you're gonna have to let me on video now. It should be in the. She goes to participants. You go to participants. You should see panelists and allow them start a video.
Yes. I'm just going to make you host so you can do it.
Oh, there we go.
Yay. Thank you, Tyler.
The computer crashed for some reason.
Okay. I just, people had a bunch of great questions they're throwing in the chat.
Yeah, I saw that one question that someone asked. So actually in that context, we were talking about a specific question that you received from an individual that I received that I forwarded to you before. It was a long question, so I didn't weave it into the webinar like I've done with most of the questions I received. And in that, no, he's actually married to a woman. So he struggled with, in his story, whether he was gay, whether he was maybe bisexual, and then eventually found a way to navigate it. For now, maybe forever, who knows, has found a way to navigate this in a way he's comfortable for today. And my question was related to his specific story.
Yeah.
Right? Is there a way, my question was, is there a way from your lens that can be, that choice can come from a healthy space? Maybe that was my one way to word the question.
Yes. Okay. Should we continue on the questions that you've received before? Or? Yeah, some of the other ones that I was referring to before we got cut off, I was talking about our first conversation. One of the things you mentioned to me is that kind of nuance. Yeah. And I want to be clear, I'm not coming from a space of a spokesperson for orthodoxy or halacha or any of these things. I'm not supremely careful in my own life with many aspects of it. That's something that I'm navigating myself, is my relationship with, I grew up Chabad, very, very, very religious. And, up till several years ago, I didn't consider myself Shomer Shabbat. And now I'm bringing Shabbat back in a way that's maybe my parents would see and they would consider it a desecration or a violation of Shabbat. So I'm not coming at all from a place of halacha. It was more the sensitivity and the nuance, which you said that some people who are navigating these choices are doing it with extreme sensitivity for halacha. It's not someone who's saying, okay, I'm gay, and that is who I am going to be, and that is my identity, and that is how I'm going to live. They're still doing that with a profound sensitivity to halacha, which oftentimes people who make that choice, I think in my view, are perceived as not caring about halacha at all. Yes. Yeah. So I'm just checking to see if we're still recording.
Recording in progress.
We may have missed some parts.
So yes, I think I'll just rephrase the question. The question is, I think oftentimes people hear like someone's identifying as LGBTQ or as gay, like they assume certain behavior. That means that they're doing behavior that violates Jewish law, like certain sexual behavior that individuals can engage in that's like against halacha, is the word. And when you and I talked about it, I was telling you how there are so many people I know or have come across whom that assumption doesn't ring true. And like to take it out to the broader perspective for a minute, when we think about our friends and family who are in heterosexual relationships, man and woman being married, we don't normally like jump to like, so what are they doing in the bedroom and which of those things are like Jewish, permitted by Jewish law, which of those things are not. They just get like a blanket cover, like you're good, you're straight, like we're good. Like check, 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 everything's great. But then when someone's saying, okay, I am a man who wants to live with a man, we assume, oh, you're doing things in your bedroom that are against Jewish law. Why? Why are we making that assumption? And furthermore, that assumption is sometimes not even true. For people who are holding Jewish law so close to their hearts, oftentimes like two men will decide to be together and talk to their rabbi about how they can honor Jewish law in their bedrooms. Not that it's anyone's business either way. It was just
right.
like,
I was going to say that it was more about the sensitivity that someone has that sensitivity, and oftentimes, actually, a good example was the article that was shared with both of us earlier today of the individual who went to synagogue, didn't even tell anyone he was gay, just went to synagogue, didn't say he was married to a man, didn't say anything, and then was asked to leave, and it was a really difficult article to read. And that's what was playing in my head at the time, is here you can have someone who may be profoundly sensitive to halacha in a lot of ways. We have no idea the individual we're talking to. Not that he has to be in order to be accepted to shul. I've driven to shul.
Yeah, and that's also like kind of a weird thing, right? Like if someone gossips, right? Someone wears a skirt that's too short, that's cool. Come to shul. You get an aliyah, you've been to prison, come to shul, that's fine. Oh, you're in a relationship with someone of the same gender. Okay, now that's the line. Like, why is that thing the line and the other? It feels like sort of targeted. And
so if we were to flip it, is there any level of understanding on the other side? Is there any level of understanding for the Orthodox community on why that's challenging?
Is there any understanding on behalf of the Orthodox?
Is there any way to state that in a way that's understanding towards the Orthodox community? When I read that article, to be clear, why wouldn't this person be accepted into shul? Like I said, maybe a different way of asking the question is there a line maybe that someone may cross that you feel, okay, hey, that is appropriate for, meaning in that article, there were some things he was saying, like, hey, I didn't even tell the rabbi that I was gay. Well, if he did, would that be too far?
Right. And
that's what I'm saying.
To be fair to the Orthodox community, like, I do get why this is different. I do get why it's really frightening for people. I think that our community has done a really good job prioritizing family values and building worlds around which like family is at the center, and people who don't have enough exposure like to the queer spectrum might be just really afraid, because anything that we don't have enough exposure to is very scary. And so I could imagine that for people to think, oh, like two men could be in shul together, it might be scary to think what happens like if my child sees that, and it gives them ideas, and that's why we need to like just continue to educate people and help them feel more comfortable with the whole topic so that it doesn't seem as frightening.
So can we speak to that in terms of ideas? Like what is that fear? What is the actual fear? If we were speaking to someone, maybe it's a norm, right? Sometimes there's something, hey, this is the way it was done. Like the rabbi said in this article, he said that I went to my rabbi and this is what my rabbi said to do. So I'm kind of following orders, so to speak. But Is there a fear that could be articulated on the other side? I'm sure you've spoken to parents and worked to reconcile, or not reconcile is maybe the wrong word, work to bring understanding between parents and children. By children, I don't mean children. I don't mean a kid. I mean, it could be an adult child. So is there an example you can give of a level of understanding you were able to bring between parents and children on this topic where there was some misunderstanding or some fear that you were able to then resolve in conversation? Like, what is that fear? Like when you say, oh, my child is going to see, and then what? He's going to start becoming gay? I mean, what is the fear exactly?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that's actually right. The fear is like, wait, if this is an option, I didn't know it was an option. Oh, okay. Like being with a boy is an option. I just thought it was girls. What if he then decides that that's something he wants to pursue?
Understood. And what would you say to someone who has that?
Is, even though we have come such a long way in the outside world on accepting queerness, we're still very behind. 2015 was the first time that gay marriage was legalized in the United States. So being along the rainbow spectrum, I call it, like gender or sexual orientation, not like cisgender, not straight, it's still dangerous in the outside world. Look at all the things that are happening to trans kids, the way gay rights are being challenged all the time. It's not so fun for us. It's still hard. It's still painful. We're not good. We're not in a place where this is like a fun area of the playground. We're still battling sharks and snakes out here. And so it seems like it's not that tempting. And we know that queer youth are 4 to 5, 6 times more likely to experience suicidality. This is not
I understand what you're saying is that just because it's an option, people aren't necessarily going to be running there.
It's still not. Yeah, it's still not it's not that scary yet. I hope we get to the day where it's like, oh, it's like an true equal choice. And then maybe we can re-ask that question then. Right now, we're not there at all. And so to deny some people rights for fear that other people will want to be in this sort of stigmatized, persecuted population of individuals, it's just not reflective of reality.
Understood. Can we talk about, you asked me yesterday, do I have any fears around this conversation? Right. And I said that, I think you said, are you uncomfortable getting, what was the word I used? I don't know, attacked or in some way, what I say. And I said, no, I'm actually not. I talk about uncomfortable things and I'm okay with it. I don't want to do it without purpose.
Yeah.
So I talk about certain subjects, and if I don't think I've gone to school sometimes in yeshivas and had conversations around pornography or porn addiction or some of my talks there. And it's not the most Orthodox schools which are bringing me talking about porn addiction. It's, let's say, ones which have realized, being a little bit more open about these topics is okay. And I'm not everyone's a fan of that. Like, hey, maybe you're introducing pornography to someone. Well, maybe I am. The statistics tell you that I'm not. But meaning I'm talking about these topics, and I don't mind being criticized when I'm talking about. What I'm fearful of is going into a topic that I have no business being in, meaning as what I do, talking about certain subjects like porn, abuse, mental health, whatever it is that I'm trying to bring awareness or sensitivity to, and maybe healing to. And going into this topic just alienates people who I can otherwise reach with my message. Right? That was what I said. And the reason I said that despite that, I'm talking about anyways, because I think that this hits so heavily on belonging. And to me, that's right in my wheelhouse, right? That's why I said earlier, it's not about Orthodox identity, because that can make it sound like, okay, Orthodoxy, like these rules. Someone who's not understanding that, looking from the outside, is okay. Why are you trying to reconcile your queer identity and Orthodox identity? Just don't. They can't be reconciled. It's like, no, it's not Orthodox identity. It's someone's belonging. It's that sense of belonging. And when someone doesn't have that, whether it's their family or community, and I've always felt that, despite the fact that I grew up Chabad, and despite the fact that my choices didn't always follow every halacha, I always felt a sense of belonging in the community. I do today, and I did throughout. I wear a yarmulke today. I didn't always wear a yarmulke, and I always felt that sense of belonging. And that's the reason why I said, okay, let's talk about this topic. So can we talk a little bit about the importance of belonging, how this touches on it, B, and C, what do you see as the promised land in this arena? So maybe it's 3 different questions, but all connected.
So let's just break down belonging. I think we might even be pre-belonging. We're in some arenas in the Orthodox world, we're just striving for safety and to keep queer kids and adults alive. And so the statistics that we have are, this is not the fun part of the conversation, but it's staggering. I helped Jewish queer youth start their drop-in center on Long Island and the 5 towns, and I used to help to do the intakes for those drop-in centers, and just like we would ask kids a few questions when they came in. How are you? How are you identifying? What brings you here? One of the questions on our intake form is, have you ever felt suicidal? Out of a survey of hundreds of kids who've come to the drop-in center, can you guess the percentage who felt suicidal?
I'm not sure I want to.
It's 70%.
Wow.
7 out of 10 kids have looked around, said, on some level, there's the Orthodox world, here's who I am. There's no future for me. I might as well just die.
Would it be safe to say that 100% of these children who walked into your center said to themselves all of the things that the community may be saying to them?
Of course. You think the things that anything that's been said, I've said to myself times 100.
Let me try and change it. This is not really who I am.
Of course, it's just an isayon. I can get through this. God will help me. I'll fast. I'll do whatever I need to do. Of course, they're sometimes saying all those things to themselves.
Right. This is one of the points I often made on when talking about child sex abuse, is that the knee-jerk reaction of many people is saying, "Why can't you get over it? It happened 20 years ago." I say, well, don't you think I thought of that? You think you just introduced that idea to me? Don't you think I said that to myself a bunch of times? Why can't I get over it? It happened 20 years ago. So I think that someone having that sensitivity, and this also goes back to the fear that you mentioned earlier, is that no one's walking into here saying, no one walking from the Orthodox community saying like, "Hey, great, let me try this on today." It's after a wrestling match. It's after trying to push that down and suppress that and deny that aspect, whatever it is, those feelings, those thoughts, those whatever, however we quantify it. And then after a period of time saying, I can't anymore, and then, okay, let me walk into a center. I can't deny.
Yeah.
It's real. Understood.
It's not easy. If you look around the Orthodox world, even if you're in a really good section of it where people are accepting and, some people wear pants and it's modern Orthodox, some women wear pants, for example, it's still mostly straight. It's still really hard for queer young kids to see a future for themselves, to see role models of people who are anywhere on the queer spectrum. And when those role models present in our Orthodox environments, they're fired.
But aren't those when you say mostly straight, aren't those, it's typical in any society? I'm sure in my kid's school, which is not an Orthodox school, it's also mostly straight.
it's still going to be, I guess we want like just maybe 4%, 5%, some representation, a little bit. We want to see something to show like, okay, there are two dads in the fourth grade. That would be enough to keep someone going.
Right. So what would that look like? Because what is realistic? Like, I don't know that in, I don't know, the community that I grew up, like, I'm not sure that I can envision that happening. I can envision not meddling into someone's business, right? Not finding out that someone, I don't know, is doing something in their private life. I can envision that. I can envision, I don't know, people being allowed to shul and not asking questions. Like, I can envision those things, but could I envision two Chabad male parents in Crown Heights bringing their children to school? It's hard for me to imagine. Maybe in a modern Orthodox, I can see it. I'm saying, look, what is realistic here? What is the actual goal and objective? And maybe you see something more, and that's why you're working on this, and that's why you're pushing this forward.
You know, I really do have so much hope for the Jewish community. In 2007, I started giving lectures about child sexual abuse in the Orthodox Jewish community. And then it became a bigger and bigger part of my job because at first nobody wanted to hear about it. And you remember this too, right?
Sure. When I started, it was the same way.
Yeah.
Later than you, but it was still that way.
People are like, that doesn't exist in our community. We don't want this here. We don't have this here. It's at the Hasidim, it's at the Litvish, it's at the Chabad, not us. And then by 2012, I was lecturing all throughout New Jersey at Chabad, at the modern Orthodox schools, at the religious schools, at the single ed, the co-ed, because our community has such big hearts at the bottom of it often. And we do change, we do grow. And in those days, like parents would bring kids to me for treatment of sexual abuse after it had been hidden for 5 or 10 years. And the children would be so traumatized.
Right.
Now, parents call me and they say, I think something might have happened to my child.
Right, it's very different.
Right? Look how far we've come. It's now there's part of our curriculum. We have books I have a book in my office right here in Yiddish about body safety. So, I think our community will and can get there. Not in one step.
So what would that look like? Would that look like the assumption would be kind of within society, within the Orthodox society, that if I see two dads for a child, that most likely they've worked this out with the rabbi and whatever, that's their business. I should just assume that everything is just like I would about anyone else, right? That's the way you envision it.
I think it'll happen in waves. The modern Orthodox communities are making strides. They're bringing people in to educate their students. We're already getting to the point where people who would have been married off, despite having feelings inside that they shouldn't really be married off. Those people are stopping, thinking, getting support before being rushed into a decision. So I think we're like a little bit away from the two dads in Crown Heights, but I don't think it's impossible.
And for someone who hears that and thinks that's terrifying, like that's a disastrous reality, because I can imagine someone on the other end of this, like, what are you trying to do to the community?
I hear them too, and I know how scary this is, and I think that we will have hopefully so much of an opportunity for people to learn more, to ask more questions. And also for that person who thinks it's so terrifying, I really want them to consider that for queer individuals, we've been uncomfortable for a really long time in a very core way. And I know it's uncomfortable to think about this, and it's scary to think about this. But is it so bad? Is it okay maybe for you to be uncomfortable just a little bit and just consider why this is so scary for you?
Right. One of the analogies I've always given is, and I think it's reasonable and realistic. The question came up in the Rabbi YY event where someone said that I went to my rabbi But I said that I can invite my cousin who's in a lesbian relationship over with her lesbian girlfriend. I think it may have even been alone. I'm not sure, but the question was there. I think it may have been alone, not even with her spouse or girlfriend. And my question was, and my rabbi said it's not okay, and wanted the question could you forward this question to Rabbi YY Jacobson? Mm-hmm. And my question was, would the rabbi say the same thing about someone who didn't keep Shabbos? And if they did, then I'm fine. Like, if you want to treat them the same way, then no problem. But if you want to start making distinctions between different laws, then that sounds to me like personal prejudice, personal bias. It has nothing to do with halacha. You're now stepping into some other territory. And that's why when I gave the Crown Heights example, I said, I can see that. Like, I can see us arriving at this place of, hey, why do I view this so differently than someone not keeping Shabbos? Is this really about halacha? Is this really about Judaism, or is this really about something to do with me? And I think that hopefully, I would imagine people hearing me ask that question would wonder for themselves, hey, am I doing that? Am I stepping over because of a personal bias and not because of the actual letter of the law? I would say personal discomfort. And it's normal to, like you said, it's very, very, it's very normal to start at that place. But to say, if I didn't keep Shabbos, that I can have children in an Orthodox school, and I cannot keep Shabbos in an obvious way, obviously, right? Doing that in an obvious way, I can have children in Orthodox school. That sounds to me like a leap. That sounds to me like a major leap. I don't see kind of school saying, okay, we're cool with someone not being there. Is that, when I say that, is that a reasonable destination, so to speak, for people to treat this the same way they would treat any other halachic thing, or is there, or am I missing something when I'm giving that analogy?
That's such a good question, because it's so, like, I'm sitting here just thinking of 1,000 different things in my mind. It's so complicated. Like, is the best that we can hope for to be compared to other sinners? It's kind of a really tough, you know what I mean? And it's really not even on you, the way that was phrased, because it's like, it's just so hard. It goes with that same assumption with the word homosexual. And I just want to say, like, Siddha, like, just to tease it out a little bit, being something is not the same as doing the thing.
So speak to that, because I'm not clear on that.
Like,
I have an example. In that article that was shared earlier, it said, we have no problem if you're LGBT as long as you're not active sexually. I'm like, okay, so then, so separate that for me, because I don't understand that. I mean, what does it mean for someone saying they're LGBT but they're not active sexually? Well, let's stick to lesbian and gay, and they're not active sexually. Like, then what does that mean? I can understand they're not active sexually in a halachic way and those things, but is that a rabbinical body being understanding, saying, oh, sure, we accept LGBT as long as you're not active sexually?
It's not really being understanding, because unless they're monitoring the sex lives of their cisgender or heterosexual congregants as well.
Well, I think there's monitoring, right? So there's stating it as a fact. No one's going into anyone's house and checking, but this is just, hey, this is where it's at. This is our baseline. We're not checking on it. I mean, when you read that in the article, and we should put a link to it because I've referenced it so many times, I don't even remember where it was written in, but about the individual in I think Hollywood Hills synagogue or something like that, who wasn't allowed to go to the synagogue anymore. He was told he wasn't there. So there was a reference in that article to, and it almost seemed like a positive reference to a rabbinical order. We said, you can be part of the community and we accept LGBT people as long as they're not active sexually. The reason I'm asking that question is more about, can you separate that for me? Because that doesn't make sense to me. Can you separate when you say the being and the doing, the same thing? So what does it mean to be and not to?
Well, I love listening to podcasts. I'm a podcast person. I'm not a music person, I'm a podcast person. That's who I am. I'm not always listening to a podcast. Sometimes I'm working. Sometimes I'm sleeping. Sometimes I'm listening to a podcast. But whether I'm working or sleeping, I'm still the podcast.
Well, that's moment to moment. But if you love listening to podcasts, I would imagine that over the course of a week, a month, or year, you would have listened to a podcast.
Yeah, that's me, right? But maybe 1 year I'm like really busy doing something else. That doesn't mean I'm not a podcast listener inside. So that's the difference between being and doing.
Right. So what is the importance of it? Meaning for someone to say, I'm in a relationship, and this may be a completely, like to you, you may hear this a crazy question, but it's a genuine question.
Every question is a beautiful question, Ellie. Like, I'm just so happy to be asked these questions. Because if you weren't asking the question, someone else would be assuming it and not asking. So don't worry. Like, yeah, go ahead.
Perfect. So there's, in the example of the two dads.
Mm-hmm.
So why would I make any assumption whatsoever that there's a being and doing not happening there?
Well, I think that what we want to do
is the being, what is the doing?
So let's just take a step back off of that. See, this is what happens is like we get a little myopic around the topic of queerness in our community. It's like suddenly we want to just go to the person's bedroom. And why, again, like I think we need to question if that's appropriate for any of us to do at any time. I know that for straight couples, for example, because I was part of one, and then long story, but you'll see in the book, there are a lot of Jewish laws around intimacy and sex. Times of the month that you're on, times of the month that you're off. You have to do all these different things in order to get to your on time of the month. You go to the mikveh, you have an attendant, you have a rabbi examine anything that's questionable. But again, we're not really talking about the straight person's bedroom. They get their privacy. They get to choose. And how many straight couples have you and I known who sometimes do things, sometimes don't? They're not perfect. It's okay. They're part of the community. We're not so I guess the question becomes like, do we at a point like where's the, okay, let's let them have their bedroom.
I hear that. It sounds nice, but it doesn't totally land the question. So maybe going back to that article where it says LGBT people are accepted in this community, and then adds that line, as long as they're not active sexually. Is that accepting or is that not?
It's not accepting because it places a double standard. It puts LGBT couples at a different standard than the straight couples within the same congregation in terms of we are commenting on your sex life.
But doesn't that go back to halacha in some ways? And that what a rabbi would say, doesn't that go back to halacha?
They say that
halacha does deal with people's sex life, right? In the same way that it deals with menstrual cycles and other aspects of it. It does deal with it, and it also deals with this. I mean, there is a difference between.
Here's the difference. They're not telling the straight couples, do this or you can't come here.
Right, but with the straight couples, there is a situation where this could be okay according to Jewish law, and it may not be in many. You're saying, but there's a situation where it could be, whereas specifically with gay, more than lesbian, there's not, unless we assume a non-active sexual lifestyle. So I guess you can say, don't assume, you're not assuming anywhere else, but people will. So the distinction you made, and that's kind of going in circles a little bit, is you made a distinction between being and doing. So what's the difference between, meaning, if someone says, okay, my identity is queer, and then in much the same way that my identity is straight, but I may be celibate for a while, whatever it is, that the identity is still there independent of anything else. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
So what is that? What does that feel like? If you can I don't, maybe it's just can't be described, but I think for myself and others, like, that can be helpful because I don't know that that's understood. And I think that if that was understood, that maybe some of what you're looking to achieve could be. What is that feeling of queer identity versus homosexuality?
I think
I don't know if my question makes sense.
It's like it's a good thing I'm a writer, and I spent like the last 3 years trying to articulate this in writing.
My question's clear though, right?
Yeah, I think it's such a tough question. I guess how would you describe like having a straight identity? And that's also a tough, like an unfair question. I don't know. It's like a tough. I don't even want to
question differently, right? So, you're married to a man, right? You were married to a man at a certain point.
Yes.
So, okay, I guess the question answers itself. You're saying that itself, that would feel as awkward to you married to a man would feel as awkward to someone, independent of anything sexually. Just that emotional bond would feel as awkward to someone who was straight being with someone of the same gender.
Yeah, and like just
independent of the sexuality, that emotional relationship, that being in that relationship is also awkward. Is that?
Yeah, and like I will answer that. Like my experience of going through that was, it was really tough for me because what I was doing with being married to a man is trying to like not be in my body in order to do that. So I was like,
when you say not being your body in order to do that sexually, or in order to do that just being in a relationship?
Like in order to meet sexual demands of an Orthodox marriage.
Right, that I understand.
Right, that requires a level of dissociation. Now the problem that comes with that is that then I feel like disconnected from the person I'm with on an emotional level, and my body actually felt fear. So if he would be like, hey, why is there a mess in the other room? I jumped because my body was already going through so much trauma of having to like subject myself to this experience that felt very traumatic for me. And so the whole dynamic was messed up, because of that.
So there are many people who live in sexless marriages, let's say.
Yeah.
So maybe to parse apart, if the marriage was sexless, if someone, like yourself, someone else, there was no sex, is there still that same level of discomfort? It's just in the being of it?
I think part of the discomfort also was, like, for me, is like I felt like my husband deserved to be loved. And I wasn't able to provide that in the way that he deserved. And so, if we're married...
And you don't mean that sexually, you mean that emotionally.
As a person, he deserved to have someone there who was fully present for him. As did I. And so, like, yes, you could be in a sexless marriage, but what about each...
I'm not saying one should be. What I'm saying is you answered the question in the way that you were out of your body because...
So if you're in a sexless...
You were doing something you didn't want to do. So imagine the marriage was sexless. Would it also have that same quality? I'm trying to separate that being and doing that you...
That's just... I mean, that sounds like a different quality. That just sounds sad.
I agree. There are many straight people with sexless marriages, but it's a conceptual question. I'm not saying it should be there. I'm not saying it should be there.
We have a little bit of a boundary issue in the Orthodox Jewish community, and I say that so lovingly because it's also the same community that if someone has a baby, will like organize 2 weeks of a meal train, and it doesn't matter if that person's your teacher, your friend, your mother's friend, like you will be there with the meal train and the food. But we're like sometimes a little bit intrusive, and I think we need to work on that.
Well, I don't think this is anyone bashing the Orthodox community because this is someone wanting to still be a part of it, right? Yeah. So it's wanting the beauty and wanting that offers and wanting that community and sense of belonging and everything that it comes with. And that's, in some ways beautiful, right? If someone said, hey, I'm queer and it doesn't match with Orthodoxy, so I'm done and I find a new community to be a part of, no problem. And we're not having this conversation. This conversation is not for them. Beautiful. This is for the person wrestling with it, which is that they do see so much beauty in it. And they do want, whether it's within the community or within Judaism, and I think oftentimes it's within the community itself, because one can likely find Judaism in another community, but there's something in that community that, I feel part of the community that I grew up in. Even, I live in Miami today, but I still feel part of it. So there is it's not trying to put down. In fact, it's the greatest compliment to the community. We still want to be a part of it. But you're saying that in terms of intrusive, it's two sides. It's an extended family.
Right, and I think we need to get out of everyone's bedroom. We all know what the law is. Everyone gets to decide. Straight people get to decide what they're doing with that rule, and so should queer identifying people get to decide. And we all need to just stay out of each other's bedrooms.
But let me ask the question one more way, because I don't know that it sounds good, right? It sounds good. We're out of straight people's bedrooms, stay out of bedrooms, and everyone's happy. But if everyone knew I lived in Miami Beach, okay, and I showed up to Hollywood 30 miles away on Shabbos, and my kids were going to the Jewish schools and everything else, and someone said to me, how did you get here? Did you drive on Shabbos? You didn't ask everyone else. Why are you taking a poll on me? Like, stay out of my driving habits. Stay out of my how I got here. You didn't ask every member of the community. Right, but there's something obvious. I don't live here. Somehow I'm coming to this place. There's basically this known violation in some way that I'm stepping into and have to answer. It's easy to say, don't ask me, just like you don't ask anyone else. But I would think I keep going back to Shabbos, and I know it's not a perfect analogy. It's the best I can come up with. There's analogies aren't perfect. But in that same space, I am going to get that question. How did you get here? And some communities are not going to be accepting of that. And it has nothing to do with someone being gay. That has nothing to do with that. It has to do with Shabbos. It has to do with the laws. And no one saw me drive. No one saw anything. But there's an assumption that's going to be made based on knowing other things. Meaning that's going to happen. I think that's human nature. That's not Orthodox community.
I feel like in order to really get into that analogy, I'm going to have to get very sexually explicit. And I don't know if we should do that on this format. So I wonder if we should just sort of table this at where it's at in the dialogue. Okay.
What do they say in the Gemara? It says teku, right?
What does that mean?
Teku is this question. Every question in Gemara is usually answered, right? And they'll wrestle for 80 pages, and then someone asks a question and said, "Let's leave this question unanswered." We weren't trying to resolve everything tonight. I think we're trying to open the dialogue, and hopefully, I learned a lot. I got a good understanding. Hopefully, it was helpful for you as well, and for those listening. Do we want to take a couple of questions? I don't know your time.
Yeah, no, we're good. I'm good to take a couple. There's this so much is happening in this chat. Maybe we should try to respond to some of it. Yes, asexual. I'm so sorry if I forgot to mention people who identify as asexual. Legitimate. Yes. The problem is that the Orthodox community is so nosy. Yeah. Kind of be restated.
I just one person writes, his friend is gay, married to a woman, how awful if the woman hopes she knows. So this was actually a question that came in from someone else who I don't know. Well, I've spoken to them maybe for all the 15 minutes, and they shared their story of wrestling with their identity, for a while gay, for a while bisexual, and today straight. And I would imagine they were very open with me about it, and I would imagine they're open with their wife as well. But I don't want to get in their bedroom.
That's we get out of today, like, let's stay out of people's bedrooms. I think that is probably a good, like, that's good. That's something. I also had gotten a question on online that I can bring up.
Say again?
I had another question I had received prior to this about just something I can mention briefly. Someone had submitted a question to me via my Instagram saying, is it worth being in a relationship if I will have to keep it a secret for the rest of my life? Forever? Should I even enter into a relationship? And this was a queer relationship. Seemed like a same-gender relationship. And I don't have the answer to that question at all. I just want to point out, like, that this is the struggle. This is something that people are going through, is wondering, how am I going to handle having a secret relationship for the rest of my life? My answer to that is, to our community, let's keep having these conversations. So these are not the questions we need to ask ourselves. These are not the questions our youth are asking, because these questions are dangerous and scary and sad.
Someone posted a link to the article we mentioned the forward a number of times.
Okay.
If someone wants to go through the question and answer, they'll see the article there. There's a question here, someone saying they had about 15 sexual experiences. I don't know if you see that. There was some interaction with question and answer. Starts on male and had about 15 sexual experiences over about a 5-year period.
Mm-hmm.
Be curious you to address that and the answers within, and what do you think?
Okay. Yeah, I think Chaim Levin made the point that I would make, which is same-sex attraction is a conversion therapy term. And also, the person who wrote the book on reparative therapy, which again, not a therapy, abuse, that was like sort of his thesis statement, that same-sex attraction are attempts to find a missing bond with a parent of the same gender. So that is one of the dangerous people's talking points, and it's I don't agree with that at all. I don't think it's true. It's been disproven as a general statement. That said, to the individual who's saying that's what it felt like for you, if that's what it felt like for you, that's valid.
I mean, I think the key here, and one of the things I've found with this topic is that almost any term is charged, right? When I put the poster out, I got a message from someone that said, do you realize that the term queer is a far left activist thing, and do you know what you're doing talking about this thing? And I was like, wow, I'm finding out that homosexuality means one thing, queerness means something else. So I see over here where he wrote language, same-sex attraction, which I actually learned a few years ago, is a term that's associated and has meaning beyond the words, so to speak. But he is saying as well, I'm happily married to women. So outside of the terms that he's using, strip that aside, is there anything problematic in that? It seemed to become a conversation around terms.
Yeah, I think that we want to educate ourselves and other people about some of these things, and also we need to give people space to define their own reality. Our goal in dispelling the myths and the stereotypes around queerness is not to then create new boxes that everyone needs to fit into. Our goal is just to open the floor for people to be themselves. So if that's something that he went through and that's how he feels, that's not problematic. That's his experience. That's great.
Right. If he's happily married to a woman, by all means, it's working. If the mental health, similar to what you said earlier. But I saw from that exchange, one of the reasons I pointed out from that exchange is the way that terms trigger and then conversations move to something completely different than what they meant. And I think that most people in this conversation, like outside of this topic, and now I guess at this point, more inside than most people, right? Because I've had a few conversations about this, right? And not to mention, not to mention that I do know a lot of gay people as well. I'm saying close relationships with, so I'm not foreign completely from it, but it's not like our conversations ever go there. I'm not asking questions about these things. We just, know each other for one reason or another. But could be professional relationships or other relationships. I'm not getting into these kind of nitty gritty conversations with them. I'm not getting in their bedroom, right? These conversations are happening here. Nevertheless, I'm stepping all over things, right? Over the course of several conversations. So meaning, I think that oftentimes there's the assumption that people are trying to be offensive in some way when we're not at all. I had no idea that that homosexuality had a connotation. That word. I heard about same-sex attraction a number of years ago that has a connotation. This I just learned. I had no idea that queerness has a connotation to other people. And it seems like there's, besides for the personal stuff, and I understand why it's sensitive, there also seems to be this political layering on top of it, where let's turn this into a political issue as well, which also allows for additional, pulling and pushing in different directions. But here you have just a personal experience being shared, and if it is, it is. If it's not, it's that person's journey.
Yeah, and like one good guideline is sometimes in talking about topics like this, we assume that it's like something that is happening to other people. So one good guideline is always talk as if someone you love is queer. That means lesbian, gay, trans, questioning, bi, intersex, asexual, anywhere along the spectrum. Always talk as if someone you love is identifying along that spectrum and as if they're in the room with you. And that'll just inform your tone and the way you ask questions, the way you use language, as opposed to talking about that community or those people, as others.
Understood, right? That's right. Good rule of thumb. But there's the tone and the way of speaking about it, and then there's the intention behind it, right? I think that there's usually very small percentage points of people on either end of any issue who are actually ill-intentioned.
Yeah.
Okay. We'd love to hear from Orthodox queer couples at the next webinar.
Oh.
Didn't we just...
Well, we could take some up. We can invite them. We don't even have to take them. We can just invite them.
Someone asked this question. Would love to know why the community as a whole is more hesitant to accept two dads when they fully accept child predators. 100%. 100%. I've had this conversation with Yeshiva I was talking to about a teacher who abused a student. And I just could not get through to the school. I'm just being more appropriate. I forget exactly what they did. Moved him up a grade, or he was fired at the end of the year, or something which wasn't, nearly aggressive enough. Call the police or more. And I said, you recognize that if we weren't talking about a 40-year-old man and a 9-year-old boy. If it was a 40-year-old man with a 40-year-old man, this guy would have been out of school within 6 minutes. And it's only because it was a helpless 9-year-old child that somehow you're giving this some consideration. Yeah, it seems like that gets thrown out the window. If only, I'm saying this tongue in cheek, but if only child molesters were treated like gay people in the community. Okay. It's all good. I'm kidding.
We have a safer world, yeah.
What? But I've seen that a lot. Yes, I agree 100% with this. With this thing, it's pretty confounding. I mean, it seems, the message you're sending about, stay out of people's bedrooms, I mean, it seemed to be resonating with this audience here, right? Asking the questions. So I wonder what, I would imagine that this audience is a somewhat self-selecting group, right, that would attend a conversation like this. But by all means, I mean, if it's resonating with people, I think it's nice. It sounds great. Stay out of people's bedrooms and let people live. I'm all for that. I just wonder if that's actually like realistic, if that message will actually resonate with people.
It's a goal.
Oh, there's a great, this is actually a very good one. An unmarried couple living together. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was me for 5 years, yeah. Does the rabbi say you can come to a shul, but only if you're not sexually active? I was never told that. I was never told that. Yeah, I think this is the point that someone is making here, which is similar to the point you said here, which is that there are queer couples who do figure out a way with their rabbi of doing things. So once that's there, then that can be the assumption, right? Meaning, say, hey, there's totally a way that there can be a rabbi involved if you view this from a halachic standpoint, and here's a queer couple who is, meaning there's a possibility of. Once there's a possibility of, then why shouldn't there be an assumption for? I think everyone can get on board with that.
Yeah.
I mean, once there's a possibility of it being halachically, that there's a way this can be halachically appropriate, then stay out of people's bedrooms. Like, have the assumption that there is. That's why I gave the example of driving from Miami Beach to Hollywood. Like, that was the...
Someone had a good response to you there. They said, it's not the same analogy because the person who drives on Shabbos is breaking a rule in public. The person who is openly gay isn't breaking anything. I'm just paraphrasing in public.
Sure.
Having sex in public.
No, and I understand that, and that's the stay out of people's bedroom, and I understand it. But saying that, and I think it's an important point, is that there is a way for there to be a gay couple, who is observant of every halacha. Right? If that's what someone is saying, then why can't there be the assumption for it? Why can't there be the assumption for it? I wonder. That's a question we'll ask YY Jacobson on the next.
Yeah. Like, why can't we be done like Hafsachos, for example, right? For that, like, let's use that Jewish thing of plausible deniability.
Right, why can't we be? We're supposed to be, right? That is the instruction. If there's a way to be, then by all means. I feel like Nash is pushing an agenda that queer Jews should marry the opposite sex and be in a sexless marriage in order to fit into Orthodoxy. If you feel like I'm pushing an agenda, then I don't know. I'm not sure where that's coming from. Do you feel like I'm pushing an agenda?
I think that you being here is really just saying everything people need to know about your intention. I think it's a risk to you to have this conversation. And so that's enough to speak to me about your intention here is not to push an agenda, it's to understand and to ask questions. And I hope that by the end of the conversation, whoever put that comment in can see where your intention was going.
Right. I think what's clear to me in reading some of these is that there is, like that sunburn analogy, and there is a lot of oversensitivity around the issue, the assumption that using the term homosexual, using some other term that some have determined is offensive, that is actually coming from a bad place. In fact, my job, and I should have said it at the beginning, my job here is to ask the questions that I have and the questions that I think others will have. Otherwise it can just be you talking, right? But I think that the way this moves forward is when some of those things are fleshed out. What is that question that someone listening might ask? And it's not the person who agrees with you that you're looking to move. It's a person who doesn't agree with you, who you're looking to move on something. So I'm in some ways representing a certain side. It has nothing to do with my personal. It's not always my personal question. I didn't differentiate each time. But okay. But I see that in some of the responses. There's like this knee-jerk reaction to find that I'm doing something wrong. But I understand. As someone over here says, the problem is that the Orthodox community is so nosy. I think that's two sides of the same coin.
Like we said,
Right, we're nosy when someone's born. Also, when someone gets sick. I mean, the fundraisers that are done when there's when someone passes, tragedies happen. This is the community. It's the nature of it. You want them to be busy with one, not the other. I mean, ideally, but that's what I see the Orthodox community as, an extended family. And for good or for bad, it has the complications. And there's a reason that despite making certain choices that weren't fully aligned with it, I still am proud to be a part of a community. And there's still a lot that I want to be a part of. And I want my children to feel a part of a community. There's so much beauty in that. Sure, there's that comes at a price sometimes, and there's more we can learn about each other. But overall, I think that this isn't a webinar about putting down the Orthodox community, because if that was the case, then there is no intersection to resolve. There's just a clear identity, and then what's the reason to have this conversation? There's no intersection.
Can you imagine a day when like the Yenta and the Hasidic community is like, "Ooh, his brother is gay. I know another man. Is your brother-in-law's brother?" All then tries to set people up. Like maybe that's in the future where the nosiness works for the queer community, and people make like a shidduch and like get involved and like come to the wedding and help people find resources. Maybe there's a world in which the nosiness works in the future.
I hear that. And by the way, I understand what I was mentioning is I understand the oversensitivity. I understand that certain people have been marginalized in strong ways, and there's the hypervigilance on finding enemies. Like I understand why it's there. I'm not poo-pooing it. I get why it's there.
Yeah.
I don't love it, but I'm not poo-pooing it. Okay, I think we
I think we got to the main points here. I mean, and I'm sorry if there's anything that we didn't get to. We wanted to I want to give myself a reason to be invited back. So maybe I'm saving some of these good questions for another time or another conversation.
Someone asked who Tyler is. Tyler works with me on the podcast, and that's why I'm under his name, because we signed in from his laptop when my computer crashed. Maybe there's one question. Someone asked it this far into the webinar, the one that says, how can parents support their lesbian child while not compromising their religious beliefs? This is asking for a friend, so that's a personal question. And if someone feels that as of 9 minutes ago that wasn't addressed, I think that's worthwhile of addressing, and we can end on that. That's coming from someone who, it seems like a personal question, and I would hope that in our conversation that gets answered. How can parents support their lesbian child while not compromising their religious beliefs?
It's a really good question. I've worked with parents on this. One good way for parents to support their lesbian child is to seek treatment and support from people who do know more about what that experience is like. Finding a therapist or an organization who understands the Jewish community and also the queer identity piece, so that their child doesn't have to feel burdened to answer all the questions on their own. Sometimes it's a lot for the child to feel like, wait, I'm going through this really overwhelming thing. I'm figuring out who I am. And also I'm worried about my parents, and I want to make sure their questions are answered. So it's like reassuring for the child to know the parent has their own support. That's A. B,
I'm saying that it's the child not necessarily putting all that and trying to get all of that understanding from the child themselves, but doing some of the legwork themselves.
Yeah, like do the research, do the reading, do the phone calls, do the Googling, hear from people who are well informed in the area. Do that on your own, so that your child doesn't have to be there, like taking responsibility for educating you and supporting your emotions through it. And without compromising, I mean, just love them. Know that your child is under already more risk, even if they're acting cool, even if they seem good. It's hard coming from an Orthodox family and coming out as queer, as lesbian. So just love her and be there for her, listen to her. I don't think that's compromising any law.
Right. If I can answer that question as a child who chose not to be as religious as my parents, and for a period of time, much less, there was a time where I felt like they needed to remind me every single time I spoke to them that they didn't approve of my choices.
Yeah.
And eventually I told them, I said, I know that. Like, I literally know that. That's why you live the way you live, and I live the way I live. You wouldn't do that if you approved of all my choices. I know it. You don't have to remind me every single time we meet each other. Like, it's okay. I get that there are certain choices of mine that are not compatible with yours, but we can still have a relationship. So I think that question, I think the question, as much as that question extends beyond beyond lesbian children or beyond queer identity, that's many parents have trouble with that. Are you the one who told me about the organization called PORC, Parents of Religious Kids? So there's a support group, an organization for parents of kids who decide to become religious.
Oh.
So parents struggle accepting kids' different choices all the time, and that's something that many parents, need to accept. And it's not a compromising of religious beliefs or any beliefs, just to accept someone else's choices.
Yeah.
So, again, not answering the lesbian question, but more, as feeling like I had that struggle with my parents. My parents had that struggle with me.
That's a good point. Your kid already knows how you feel, most likely. You don't need to restate it.
All right, so thank you so much, Dr. Glass. I really enjoyed this conversation. And hopefully we'll get an opportunity to have more of them. And hopefully our stated intention of having fun at the beginning was accomplished for you, and also to bring some healing and understanding and opening dialogue, not only for ourselves, but for others to further this conversation and see where it goes. I learned a ton from this conversation and the previous conversations we have. So if anyone has anything to say about me, know that I'm different than I was 2 hours ago. So you're criticizing a different person. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time and the platform. Have a great evening, everybody.
Take care. Thank you. Thanks everyone for attending and joining and watching. Bye.